This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
South Africa's coronavirus infections surge by more than 250% in just 7 days. Libyan crisis deepens as the upper house proposes a delay of the election scheduled for later this month. And the United Nations warns that the current flooding crisis in South Sudan could extend by another 2 years. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. We'll bring you the details on those stories in just a moment, but first, here's Ramanyang with the day's business headlines.
That's right, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in the next half hour. The Democratic Republic of Congo is being described as an economic bright spot on the continent by the visiting head of the IMF. And South Africa's government is considering tighter pandemic restrictions on the economy given a surge in COVID-19 infections. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And let's begin the broadcast in South Africa, where the Omicron coronavirus variant is driving a fourth wave of COVID-19 infections in the country. New infections have surged by 255% in the past 7 days. But a World Health Organization regional official says only 6% of intensive care beds are occupied by COVID-19 patients. According to the health body, Africa accounts for 46% of reported cases of the Omicron variant of COVID-19 globally.
Over the past 7 days that we have seen definitely a kind of major increase in the number of cases. Almost a 255% of increase during the past 7 days in terms of the number of cases. And in terms of admissions in both public and also private hospitals, we are seeing also an increase in number of cases. And this is about almost 12% of increase when we look at the past 24 hours. That was as of yesterday. So definitely we are having more cases and also more people who have been admitted.
So we are in the second week since the identification of the Omicron variant by a stellar team of scientists in South Africa. The variant has now reached around 60 countries worldwide, 10 of which are in Africa. This continent currently accounts for 46% of nearly 1,000 cases of Omicron variant reported globally.
Well, let's now get more from our correspondent, Angelo Coppola in Johannesburg. Angelo, very high numbers there being reported in South Africa. What is the situation at the moment?
Well, those numbers are high, but there doesn't seem to be much anxiety in the country at the moment. This morning we heard from the minister in the presidency talking about the feedback from the cabinet meeting, where everyone's waiting for an appointment to hear what the president has to say. And we've been told there's no scheduled presidential address at the moment. We also know that there's no meeting between of the National Corona or COVID Command Council. That hasn't happened just yet either. But what they are saying is they want to make sure they don't make the same mistakes they made in the last 3 lockdowns, where they got over anxious, shut everything down, and the economy suffered. So now there seems to be a bit of a more balanced approach to making sure that lives and livelihoods are maintained. We know that the death rate is at very low levels right now. In fact, last night's death rate was at 36, and that compares to 19,000 new cases. So it seems that there's a lot more calm, there's a lot less anxiety going on. Those numbers might be high, and they're probably going to be high tonight as well. But the big issue is the fact that it's moderate infections. People aren't displaying the symptoms that they displayed in lockdowns 1, 2, and 3, or with the Beta or Delta variant. So it seems a lot calmer and also a lot more measured this time around. And hopefully it will maintain that same level of calmness. And the country is preparing for a bigger increase in numbers, but not an increase in hospital admissions. And that's the big issue. People aren't on oxygen, and they're also not on ventilators. They're in there displaying very mild symptoms, which is good news.
All right, Angela Coppola for us there in Johannesburg. Meanwhile, though, South African researchers say the Omicron variant makes Pfizer and BioNTech vaccine significantly less effective. A small preliminary study shows a 41-fold drop in the shot's ability to fight against the new strain compared with the original virus. The preliminary findings echo the drug maker's initial lab results. The companies also found a third jab boosts protection against Omicron remarkably, and the two-dose series may still be effective against severe disease. The Zimbabwean government is considering banning unvaccinated people from using public transport. The country's information minister, Monica Mutsavangwa, said on Tuesday that a time is coming when people will not be allowed to board public transportation without a valid vaccination card. Farai Mwakutuya reports from Harare.
Thousands of commuters pass through this bus terminus in downtown Harare every single day. But very soon, only those who are vaccinated against COVID-19 may be allowed to board buses here. That's if a government measure to try to contain COVID-19 infections is implemented. Worried by a surge in COVID-19 infections over the last 7 days, government announced Tuesday that it will scale up its vaccination drive, including putting up vaccination centers at bus terminuses like this to make sure that people who want to be vaccinated can do so before they board public transport. That measure has elicited mixed responses from people I've spoken to here.
I think it's good that they are making vaccines available in places like this, because some people are not vaccinated because they come from places where there aren't any. I don't think this measure will work because it will just drive people who are not vaccinated to start using unregistered taxis. Though it's a good measure, my observation is that the majority of people aren't vaccinated, so most people will be grounded and won't be able to go to work. As you can see, people are crowded in queues here because there aren't enough buses to transport everyone. So we need to get vaccinated in order to protect ourselves.
The warning to unvaccinated commuters follows the renewal of tough lockdown measures, including mandatory quarantine for anyone traveling into the country, the shortening of trading hours for some businesses, as well as a review of an overnight curfew. By December 8th, more than 2.9 million people had been fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
To Somalia now, where the second batch of COVID-19 vaccines donated by the Chinese government has arrived in Mogadishu. The vaccines will help the country continue battling the coronavirus pandemic. The Somali Health Department says it will distribute the Sinopharm doses as soon as possible to protect the lives and health of the Somali people. In April, China was the first country to donate vaccines to Somalia.
Now the number was declining because of the frontline workers, they got their vaccination, so we start to vaccine also the old people, then we start also to vaccine the normal people, the ordinary people.
I'm feeling okay. Yeah, there's no fever, there is no any problem. Yeah, I'm doing great. We are grateful to join our brothers and sisters.
They can take in several hospitals, by the way. We are not only giving it to the public, but we are dispatching it to the private. Like any other, we will be distributing all to all Somalia, all the region. So it will be available very soon, as we done with the previous, in all the states of Somalia, federal member states, and we will try to dispatch it as soon as possible with the help of the UN.
Libya's upper house is proposing a 2-month delay of the upcoming December election to February. The presidential and legislative polls are supposed to take place on the 24th of this month. The High State Council said a delay would safeguard the country's political transition. The council has failed to reach an agreement on electoral laws with the House of Representatives, which is based in the country's east. The Electoral Commission has not yet announced a final list of candidates for the presidential race following a process of court appeals over the eligibility of candidates. The UN, however, is urging leaders to stick to the current timeline. Well, let's get more on this now, and I'm joined in Cairo by Gerhard Ouda, a professor of political science at Helwan University. Professor Gerhard, thank you for joining us on the program. Now, disagreements between the various interested parties threaten to derail the election. What is your assessment of the situation? Professor Gerhard, I want to find out about your assessment of the situation in Libya, because disagreements are threatening, between the various parties, are threatening to derail the election. What is your assessment? Apologies for that, Professor Gerhard. Yes, go ahead, Professor.
Okay. Okay. Let me tell you about that. There are two visions, conflicting two visions for the future of the elections. Why we have the elections? First is that some forces want to produce some international forces and regional forces would like to produce what you call it a strong man. The other vision, the second vision, is they want to produce strong institutions. Between these two forces, the strong man and strong institutions, there is a big conflict. There is a big conflict in the how to run the elections, and that hasn't yet decided. So we don't know. Until now what is the future of the elections. Until now, what the future of the election is undetermined.
All right, Professor, then the question is then, why is this election so important for Libya?
The election is so important because it hinges everything. It hinges on the elections, because the withdrawal of the forces, of international forces, waiting to start. Now we know that 5+5, the committee 5+5 produces scenarios for the Russian withdrawal and the Turkish withdrawal. And if that's done, then the election would be peaceful. The big thing about the election is that it should be peaceful, and that is the big thing in the election.
All right.
How the election should be peaceful.
All right, Professor Gerhard Ouda joining us there from Cairo. Thank you. We can now cross over to Adel Mahroui, who is in Cairo for us. Adel, quite a controversial move there, given that elections are set to take place in less than 3 weeks. How is that move being received in Libya?
So this move has been 4 months being attempted by the Western Bloc, especially Islamists who control the High Council of State that is based in Tripoli. Now the Eastern Bloc and most of the South, which are more or less controlled by the Libyan National Army, have been standing against any process or any possibility to delay the vote. That also comes with the backing of regional powers and international powers as well, who have up until the very last meeting in Paris, the Paris Conference on Libya, all stressed that the elections must be happening on time. However, the justification from the High Council of State is that the legal foundation for these elections are fragile, which put the whole election process in jeopardy. Beatrice.
Well, Adel, the countdown to the election has been marked by disagreements over election rules and the suitability of some of the candidates. Are there efforts being made to resolve those issues? Adel Mahroui for us there in Cairo. Apologies for that drop in the line. Well, let's now go to Cameroon, where at least 22 people have been killed and more than 30 others injured in violence between farmers and herders in the country's northern region. The incident marks the latest clashes between Arab Choa herders and Mosgum farmers. According to a regional government official, the attacks have prompted residents to flee to Chad. According to a report by the United Nations Refugee Agency, reduced rainfall in the area has dried up rivers and seasonal ponds that communities depend on, leading to clashes. Similar violence in August between the two groups killed dozens of people and forced thousands to flee to Chad.
The fighting in Kuseri has been very violent. We had to cross the river at night to find refuge here. Now that we are safe, we face the cold weather and lack of food. Our children have not eaten since yesterday. We ask the Chadian authorities to help us, otherwise our situation here will be worse than the conflict we have at home.
We left in a rush, crossed the river at our own risk without taking anything. Now we are exposed to the elements, the dust and the cold. The children are at risk of becoming ill. We ask for urgent help.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. To stay with us.
No one again began holding guns.
Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
The Excellency, thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
The United Nations mission in South Sudan says flooding in parts of the country is unlikely to recede for the next 2 years. The UN is warning of a possible famine unless humanitarian support is urgently provided for the more than 800,000 people displaced by flooding across South Sudan. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
The United Nations mission in South Sudan, or UNMISS, says villages are swept away or submerged by the flooding. More than 800,000 people are displaced as a result of the rising waters. The UN said before the flooding, there were already 8.3 out of the country's 13 million population facing acute food shortage. It says experts are projecting flooding in Unity State in the northern part of South Sudan may go on for another 2 years. And for some areas, it is already the third straight year of extreme flooding.
70,000 children won't be able to go to school. And without adequate water, sanitation and hygiene, there is the potential for an outbreak of cholera or other waterborne diseases.
The UN says more than 2 million people may not have access to basic health services. 200,000 women and children are acutely malnourished and they will be at further risk. The UN says the number of people in need of humanitarian assistance is likely to continue to increase. Livestock, crops and livelihood are washed away. Wild animals and humans are all scrambling for shelter on higher ground as they struggle to survive. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Sudan's top general Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has warned against any foreign interference in the country's internal affairs. Burhan made the remarks during a speech after he attended the conclusion of a military exercise in the Makil area in the northern Nile River state. General Burhan says he has noted suspicious movements of ambassadors and diplomats who he believes are working to incite the Sudanese people. CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa reports.
Sudan's military has just concluded its training General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan says the just concluded military training is also a routine measure to prepare for a possible war in the future, stressing that it does not target a specific party.
Everyone should know that this training, which we have seen now, is a mini training, analogous to a possible battle in the future. There are no intentions to target any party, and it is a routine training. The armed forces used to train every year and summarize the training at the end of each year by holding such exercises.
The general also says his country has begun a new phase and has been liberated from all restrictions. Burhan also mentioned that the armed forces will offer unlimited support to Sudanese Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok.
Now that we are liberated from all the restrictions that had shackled us, which made us not work, and also shackled the Prime Minister in the previous period and made him not work, we say to our brother Hamdok, go ahead and we are with you, and we will support you until we cross the Sudan, as you mentioned, until the end of a transitional period acceptable to all. We then agreed to establish a system of government that the Sudanese people have accepted and elected.
Experts say the step affirms Sudan's readiness for war in the future.
In a military exercise, and this is an annual exercise in which all the armed forces apparatus are integrated, and they work in what is known as the tactical exercise, has implications. First, the process of gaining experience for skills to deal with wars, and second, the strategic direction of the exercise venue in the areas in northern Sudan. It is also a very important strategic direction because the nature of the region is similar to some areas in different parts of Sudan.
General al-Burhan also stressed that the military is ready to steer the country towards democratic elections in 2023. Wilkes Anyabo, CGTN.
The Chinese embassy in South Africa has hosted a dialogue analyzing the prospects of Africa-China relations in the post-COVID-19 era. The high-level webinar discussion comes on the back of the 8th FOCAC ministerial meeting that took place in Dakar, Senegal earlier last week. CGTN's Olisen Jamela has more.
This webinar seeks to shine the spotlight on Africa's trade and economic relationship with China. It comes at a critical time as Africa is battling the COVID-19 pandemic that has killed millions around the world. The webinar has been touted as a means to usher in the future development of China-Africa relations in the COVID-19 era.
For the first time, President Xi Jinping put forward the spirit of the China-Africa friendship and cooperation, which features sincere friendship and equality, win-win for mutual benefit and common development, fairness and justice, and progress with the times and the openness and inclusiveness. This spirit of China-Africa friendship and cooperation was elaborated in the speech as the very reason why China and Africa have such a close relations and so deep a bond of friendship. This includes efforts to fight COVID-19 with solidarity, deepen pragmatic cooperation, promote green development, and uphold fairness and justice.
China is committed to ensuring the continuation of smooth relations between the African continent and the People's Republic of China.
You see many number ones in Africa. The number one highway built by Chinese companies, number one electrified railways in Africa, the number one or the first big port built in Africa. So everywhere you see, there are a lot of investment projects done by China. So they are producing really good and social, produces so much social benefit to the countries there.
Participants in this webinar also agreed that while China is a willing participant, the African continent also has to ensure full participation in the relationship.
Of all our strategic partners, China
has indeed played a critical role with facts and evidence to show that it has invited a number of interests on the African continent at a time when the world was looking at Africa as a dark continent, a hopeless continent, and massive investment injections, and Chinese companies entering our continent has also helped us in so many ways. But the real question, I think it goes beyond what Chinese are doing for us. The bigger question is that, are we taking advantage of this opening? Are we investing in China good enough? Are we improving on the products that we can sell to the Chinese?
In this webinar, it was also revealed that the massive spread of COVID-19 and its debilitating effect on business has not damaged the strong China-Africa cooperation and the numerous infrastructure projects underway in many African countries. The participants in this webinar all agree that after 2 decades of comprehensive strategic relations, China and Africa are ready to double down on their relationship. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The 16 days of activism against gender-based violence are set to end on Friday, when countries around the globe will mark the World Human Rights Day. The annual international campaign that kicks off on the 25th of November, which is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, aims to draw attention to efforts to end the violence. But as CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa tells us, a section of African countries continue to record high numbers of incidents of gender violence.
In early October, police in Kenya's Rift Valley region arrested a 40-year-old man after he allegedly hacked his 20-year-old wife to death. Neighbors say Polo Chieng and his wife had had domestic disputes before. This last one escalated, ending in tragedy. This is just one in a raft of stories of gender-based violence that have hit Kenyan headlines in recent months. Gender-based violence refers to instances where violence is perpetrated against a person because of their gender. The violence may be physical and sexual, domestic or emotional. Victims can be male or female, but it is women and children who bear the brunt, in part because they are often at a disadvantage.
And when I talk about the most vulnerable, I include children, boys and girls, and I include the elderly.
The United Nations reports that globally, nearly 1 in 3 women have experienced abuse in their lifetime, and these numbers are likely to go up in times of crisis, such as during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is why the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence are so important, to raise awareness and to also draw attention to the fact that it can be stopped. A report by the United Nations titled Measuring the Shadow Pandemic, Violence Against Women During COVID-19 revealed that almost half of women from the countries where the research was conducted had been exposed to at least one form of violence. Exposure to violence was highest among women in Kenya, Morocco, Jordan and Nigeria. Kenya's National Crime Center reported that GBV cases increased to 2,032 between January and June 2021 from 1,057 cases reported in the entire year of 2019.
When people are stressed, they feel locked in, and then they tend to get more irritable, more angry, more aggressive.
Harmful cultural traditions and norms also contribute to the problem, making it difficult for women to leave abusive situations.
We do know that culturally, we stigmatize women who leave their husbands. We call them names, and even when they try to go back to their families, some of the families are not very supportive.
During the 2021 Paris Generation Equality Forum, Kenya committed to work towards ending GBV by 2026. Even as it heads to elections in 2022.
Or the security machineries need to really spotlight the fact that they will do zero tolerance against electoral violence of GBV-related electoral violence, so that women feel safe, to vote, but also feel safe to vie for some of these positions.
Addressing harmful cultural traditions, implementing legal measures, and empowering vulnerable groups are some of the steps that can make a difference in meeting this life-saving goal. Wilkista Nyabwa, CGTN.
Well, let's now go to Rama Nyang for a look at the day's business news. Rama.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in business today. The Democratic Republic of Congo is being described as an economic bright spot in Africa by the visiting head of the IMF. And South Africa's government is considering tighter pandemic restrictions on the economy, given a surge in COVID infections.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. The head of the International Monetary Fund has described the Democratic Republic of Congo as a rare bright spot in Africa's economic performance. Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, added that this was due to a combination of high commodity prices and government reforms. The DRC is Africa's top exporter of copper. It's also the world's leading producer of cobalt. Among the reforms enacted by President Felix Tshisekedi's administration are greater independence of the central bank and improved revenue collection. A continent-wide free trade area could essentially help to boost economic growth and reduce inequality across the continent as the Omicron variant of COVID threatens to weigh on output. According to a United Nations report, commerce under the CFTA, which started and essentially took effect on the 1st of January, could reduce coronavirus-induced economic contractions and spur sustainable and inclusive growth across the continent. Now, less than half of African countries have recorded inclusive growth in the last 2 decades, leaving about a third of households on the continent living on less than $2 a day. All but one, that's Eritrea, or the 55 nations recognized by the African Union, have signed on to join this CFTA, and more than 2/3 have ratified the accord. Now, the bloc has a potential market of 1.3 billion people with a combined GDP of over $3 trillion. It could be the world's largest single free trade zone by area when the treaty becomes fully operational sometime around 2030. South Africa's government is weighing the risks that a stricter set of pandemic restrictions might pose to the economy as it considers tightening restrictions to curb a surge in new COVID infections. Authorities are monitoring hospital admission levels before any decision is taken on what new measures to introduce. That's according to the minister in the presidency, Mondli Gungubele. He said that in a briefing to reporters on Thursday. Officials are yet to set a date when President Cyril Ramaphosa will address the nation. South Africa is currently in lockdown level 1. Last year, the government went to the highest level 5 and imposed restrictions that basically shuttered almost all economic activity except for essential services. On to the opposite end of the continent now. Egypt's net international reserves rose by the end of November to $41 billion, up from $40.8 billion in the month of October. According to the central bank, the North African nation's reserves dropped significantly to $36 billion from $45.5 billion, owing to the economic fallout caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Egypt's reserves have been gradually recovering since the middle of last year. Data from the CBE showed that remittances jumped by over 10% in the first 7 months of the year, reaching $18.7 billion, up from $17 billion during the corresponding period in 2020. Analysts also forecast that FDI inflows into the Egyptian economy will increase in the coming period, albeit with a bit of uncertainty as the global economy continues to be affected in various ways by the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're still in Egypt. The country's non-oil commodity exports went up by 40% in the first 9 months of the year to a record level of just under $30 billion. Now compare that to the $21.2 billion seen in the same period in 2020. Here's CGTN's Yasser Kim reporting on the measures that Egypt is taking to boost its exports.
These numbers show a strong rebound after the fallout caused by the coronavirus pandemic. It is partly owed to the recovery in international trade and the strong infrastructure being established by the state to ease export of goods.
The country has taken big strides in this domain with the new laws, regulations and facilities for exporters and by upgrading various forms of transport and logistics. For example, upgrading roads, developing and modernizing the existing ports and building new ports. The fast overhaul of ports, of shipping and uploading cargo and export services. This was all done in the best quality recently by the state.
The government has also supported the industries amidst the pandemic, with emergency funds as well as wavering on taxes or debts and cutting on energy bills. This helps sustain production and increase exports. Amongst the fastest growing commodities during the first 9 months of 2021 were mineral oils, all forms of plastics, electrical appliances and furniture. Agricultural products remain a top exporter too. Exports have hit $30 billion, up from $21 billion year on year, but the government says it's targeting much more.
The plan by the state had been for exports to increase from $25 billion, which has risen to $29 billion the last few days, and to reach the target of $100 billion. We are going ahead through Goso Company, which we established to set up in 16 countries worldwide. We will begin in China in January. The licenses have been issued to start there. We will also have 7 centers in Africa, as well as in North and South America, 3 offices in Europe, and 1 in India, Malaysia, and Dubai.
But these plans could be hit by a couple of hiccups.
The main challenge to export now is the supply chain disruption. The biggest issue is the lack of containers, therefore the sharp rise in freight and container costs. Egypt cannot solve this crisis because it's a global issue. I think 2022 will give us a clearer idea about this problem and the impact of the new virus variant, so we can determine how to solve this crisis.
In spite of the challenges, officials believe, just like the North African nation had the ability to rebound from the COVID-19 downturn, it will be able to achieve the ambitious $100 billion exports, up from the current $30 billion in 5 years. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Let's head over to East Africa now. The Tanzanian government has called for more concerted action to deal with global warming in order to protect the glaciers on Mount Kilimanjaro. Now, this comes as the Tanzania National Parks Authority has organized a 300-person trip to get to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro to mark 60 years of the country's independence on Thursday. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with more.
It's the highest single freestanding mountain in the world, and it forms a centerpiece of many trips to Tanzania.
A holiday in Tanzania is not complete. If you're able to achieve it, then it's not complete without climbing Kilimanjaro. Now, others climb it for the sheer objective of, yes, I've done this. And for other people, especially the adventure seekers, this is something that they've been planning for many years.
Experts estimate that Mount Kilimanjaro has lost about 80% of its glacial ice. A World Meteorological Organization report suggests that glaciers on top of Mount Kilimanjaro as well as other African mountains are melting and could disappear by 2040. This could impact the livelihoods of more than 1 million Tanzanians who depend on the mountain for survival. Being a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Tanzanian government says more work needs to be done to protect the mountain.
And we should sensitize the world to play its part to reduce the impact of climate change so that Mount Kilimanjaro is back to where it is. We believe we are going to be there.
The Kilimanjaro National Park Authority has been tasked with protecting the mountain as a tourist destination. It usually attracts 60,000 climbers each year.
We have been undertaking some restoration programs, and through these restoration programs, we have been planting indigenous trees. So in case the area is degraded, maybe due to human activities or maybe due to fire, we usually plant indigenous trees in order to accelerate the forest recovery and the overall succession process.
People who work in tourism hope that as climbers hit the summit on the Day of Independence, it will highlight the need for more action, and that efforts will increase to protect the mountain's glaciers from melting further. They believe that will conserve the flora and fauna that covers the mountain and the livelihood of the millions that depend on it. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Moshi, Tanzania.
Let's move away from the continent now and into China. Data from the National Bureau of Statistics shows that China's consumer price index had some fairly interesting changes to it and went up by 2.3% year-on-year in November. Now, the figure was higher than the 1.5% year-on-year growth recorded in the month of October. China, of course, has set its consumer inflation targets at around 3% for 2021. Thursday's data also shows that China's producer price index, that measures costs for goods at the factory gate level, went up by nearly 13% year-on-year in November. Foreign direct investment into China, on the other hand, has been maintaining a relatively fast pace of growth despite the pandemic. Data from the United Nations shows that global FDI in 2020 fell by over a third on a yearly basis due to the pandemic. Foreign direct investment into China, however, has gone up by 20% in the first 9 months of the year, according to China's Commerce Ministry. China has continued to open up its market to the rest of the world. In 2020, it eased restrictions further by unveiling a negative list for the Hainan Free Trade Port. Now, the number of restrictions in the negative list was further reduced to 27. In the meantime, China is also stepping up its efforts to improve the investment environment for building a sustainable, transparent and foreign investment-friendly market as well. Indian farm union leaders say they will end a year of protest after the government agreed to repeal 3 controversial farm laws. Prime Minister Narendra Modi agreed to scrap the legislation last month, but thousands of farmers continue to press for more demands. An umbrella body of over 40 unions held a series of meetings at the capital to assess the government's proposal. A victory march is scheduled to take place tomorrow. An interesting health policy story for you. New Zealand plans to slowly implement a total ban on tobacco sales. Effective from 2027, the legal age for buying cigarettes will be raised by 1 year each year. Now, tobacco companies say that these measures are unscientific and ineffective. Health officials, however, say smoking is the biggest cause of preventable death in New Zealand, and this policy, therefore, in their view, is needed. We'll certainly keep a close eye on that particular policy as it's rolled out. I'll leave you there for the time being, but ahead in global business, we'll be analysing the rising e-commerce fraud trends across the globe, and which jumped sharply in the busiest period of the 2021 holiday shopping period. A new report found that about 17.5% of all global e-commerce transactions during Black Friday were potentially fraudulent. So what exactly do you need to do to safeguard digital enterprises? We'll explore that and plenty more at the top of the hour. Time for a short break. Beatrice will be back with more news in 60 seconds.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kaizer, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
to bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference. Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head out now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Makers are set to get a boost as video-on-demand content grows in popularity. The Africa Rising International Film Festival partnered with digital video platform TikTok for its 4th annual event. The festival showcased films from around the continent. Many of the productions tackled pertinent issues that many Africans face in their daily lives. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
Africa's film industry is getting younger and more females are coming into the fold. Short film We Are Dying Here, highlighting the horror of gender-based violence in South Africa, opens the 4th Africa Rising Film Festival in Johannesburg. It was produced and directed by a mostly female team and has already had several showings.
Our first one was the Pan-African Film Festival in LA, the Charlotte Festival, Black Film Festival, Bronze Lens Festival in Atlanta, Berlin Female Filmmakers Festival. We've been around the world, but there's something very special about bringing it home, because this is a South African story. We have written it for ourselves, and we know that being able to tell the story among our own people is more meaningful.
Originally written as a stage production, it combines poetry and film and has been recognized for its powerful storytelling and cinematography. It was among a range of local films handpicked from countries including Egypt, Kenya and Nigeria.
When we select our films, we make sure that there's more films that are directed by females, that are directed by women. Then we are intentional about it. I think most sectors, we're not intentional, we just tick boxes to say, we've got films that are done by women, but it's not about ticking boxes. I think it's about being intentional.
This year, Arif partnered with video content giant TikTok to explore how creatives can benefit from a boom in digital platforms seen during the COVID-19 pandemic.
We're grateful for TikTok to see value as well in partnering with the film festival, because that's good for storytellers, but also now in terms of reach, that means now you can use this tool to really market your creativity at a very fast pace, with an opportunity now for people to capture their own stories literally on their phones. That has changed the landscape overall.
They're connecting the films to audiences, which is really fantastic. Sometimes that's the challenge, is that you make this piece of work, you make this film, but then actually getting it out there and connecting with people. And Arif has been a really beautiful linchpin between us and potential audiences as well. So we hope that we'll continue that relationship with them.
The festival doesn't just provide a platform for creatives, it works to develop aspiring Black filmmakers as demand for African content continues to grow globally. Julie Shire, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
China has promised to provide funds to Somalia to upgrade facilities and equipment at the country's national theatre. A memorandum of understanding for the same was signed this week between the Chinese embassy and Somalia's Ministry of Information, Culture and Tourism. The theatre hosted its first public screening in 30 years in September, after years of being used as a base for warlords and being targeted by suicide bombings. The building was constructed by Chinese engineers in 1967, but later closed at the onset of the civil war in the country in 1991. It reopened in 2012 after repairs carried out by the African Union mission in Somalia, but it was ruined again after an attack by Al-Shabaab militants.
The National Theatre of Somalia was built by China in 1965. This theatre shows the relationship between China and Somalia for centuries. A month ago, we held 2 films, and the first time in 30 years, the movie has been started here, and all the people came. And the National Theatre is the only place that the young people can come, watch movies, watch plays, watch entertainment, and feel kind of liberty and civilizations.
Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. South Africa's Kaizer Chiefs fail to honor fixtures due to rising COVID-19 cases.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
South African football finds itself in a tricky position as one of the top clubs in the Rainbow Nation is unable to put a team together to play its domestic games because of an outbreak of the new Omicron variant. Players, coaching staff and administrative staff have all been affected, leading to the club slamming its doors shut to curb the spread of the virus. CGTN CS Du Plessis reports from Johannesburg.
South Africa's most famous club is under siege. The Bafeni Glamour Boys, or the Amakosi as they are known, have had to deal with an outbreak of COVID-19 in their ranks and as a result have not been able to field a team to honour their fixtures. They've asked the Premier Soccer League to postpone their fixtures, but their requests have been declined. The situation that has unfolded has raised questions about the testing protocols of clubs here in one of the top leagues on the continent.
A team has to test on arrival, They have to test on arrival where they are going. And then they also have to test before competition. That means at least 48 hours before they play, they have to test. Otherwise, if you don't have results, you won't play. But it's not happening here at home. It's not like that. I know other clubs that are testing, but also there are those that are not testing. So where there are no strict controls and no coordinated plan, it results in something of this nature.
The Executive Committee of the PSL took a decision in August of 2020 that COVID-19 would not be a reason to postpone games and even allowed for the development players to be registered. But with the pressure mounting, the organisation could be forced into a corner to change that approach.
Kaizer Chiefs will not just sit back and say, okay, we have not honoured our fixtures, we will take maybe a 9. Right now it's still 3 points. If they don't play all their December games, Kaizer Chiefs could lose about 15 points or so, and it could cause a lot of tension. It's the most followed team, supported team, but if you can look at how things are right now, even their fans are partly divided about the situation because they still want to see their team play football, but it's not happening.
There seems to be inconsistency in testing at the 16 PSL clubs in South Africa. I'm led to believe many of them test every 2 weeks at their own expense, while others claim it is not financially viable to test so often. It remains to be seen what the outcome of the debacle between Kaizer Chiefs and the PSL is, and if it is heading to court. But clearly a lot more needs to be done to improve testing protocols so that clubs like the Amakosi aren't punished for transparency, while other clubs remain in murky waters, unwilling to show that they are also taking the pandemic seriously. CS Du Plessis, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
International Olympic Committee Chief Thomas Bach has welcomed the support of governments for their national Olympic teams ahead of the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics, despite some countries announcing a diplomatic boycott of the Games. The IOC chief says the competition has always been about athletes and not politics.
The integrity of the Games are about the integrity of the sports competitions.
And therefore, we have our full focus, on the athletes. The games are about and for the athletes, and therefore you will hear the same comment from us for every political decision from any government. We have been concerned with the athletes. We welcome that they can participate, that they are supported by their national governments, and the rest is politics, and our political neutrality, the principle is applied.
Meanwhile, the 2022 Winter Olympic flame was displayed at the Beijing University of Posts and Telecommunications on Thursday. Volunteers in the university took vows and sang the theme song of the Winter Olympic Games, while the Deputy Director of the Market Development Department of the Beijing Winter Olympics Organizing Committee said that the flame brings a message of confidence, warmth and hope to everyone.
The flame brings confidence, warmth and hope to everyone. Let us follow in the footsteps of the Winter Olympics and join hands in the ice and snow covenant.
Brazilian soccer legend Pele was hospitalized to undergo treatment for a colon tumor. Sao Paulo's hospital Albert Einstein said on Wednesday, adding that he is in stable condition and should be discharged in the next few days. The 81-year-old